I'm a first generation immigrant to this country. I'm a keynote speaker. I'm a proud dad to a 14-year-old dancing queen. I'm a trustee of my temple. I'm a Man United fan, so it's not a great time to be a Man United fan. In all of those, I guess the common theme was the belief that I had in the difference that experience makes in life. And when you strip it all back, it comes down to relationships, Shane. Whether you are a customer, whether it's family, whether it's partners, whatever it is, fundamentally it comes down to relationships.
Hi, I'm Shane Burns, CEO of Show Off, and welcome to episode 3 of the No Bull Data Show. At Show Off, we're interested in having great conversations with technical people and people that are generally just running the data businesses of the future. And today is no different. I'm joined by a man that I could only describe as having infectious enthusiasm and a verve for life like no other, Vinay Parmar. Thanks for joining me.
You're welcome, Shane. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. Okay. Who is Vinay Palmer? Let us know.
Oh, wow. That's a big question. How long have we got for this podcast?
As long as you want.
Personal life-wise, I'm a proud dad to a 14-year-old dancing queen, a proud husband to a 40-something beauty queen. She's a beautician, which is why I don't look my age, probably. I am one of 3 boys. I have a younger sister too. I'm a first generation immigrant to this country. My father moved from Kenya in 1967, moved to the UK, set up in London, had the idea of going into business with his brother, moved to Birmingham when I was very young. They fell out, as most family businesses do, over something. Then they reconciled in the end and all that kind of thing. My mom died about 25 years ago. There's a whole story around that I won't share right now, but it was a pivotal moment in my life. I lost her really young, and I think that then set off a chain of events and decisions that I made in my life that took me down a certain path of how I look at life, how I relate to life.
Yeah.
My early career was in banking and financial services. I was part of the team that set egg.com up back in the 90s. If some of your audience are old enough to remember that. I find myself increasingly speaking to audiences where I say, anyone heard of Egg? And they're all born after 1990 something, so that I don't remember. But I'm hoping some of your audience do. It was a revolutionary bank, the first fully online bank in the UK, no branches, completely online. And I've spent 10 amazing years there. And then I went on to do consultancy for another decade. And then I was speaking at National Express's conference in 2015, where I shared a session on customer experience. And on the back of that, we engaged in a project and I ended up joining them, which was supposed to be for a year or maybe 18 months and then turned out to be 8 years.
Yeah.
Leaving last year in July. And I took a bit of time out to think about what I wanted to do. I got to September. My wife was like, India's gone back to school. I'm busy. You can't just sit around at home and do nothing. Need to think about doing something. And so I set up initially a consultancy around Riverstar, and I'm also building a keynote speaking business. So I'm a keynote speaker. It's a thing that I love to do most in the world, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit. Yeah, that's kind of my humble beginnings, I guess.
You worked at brands like Audi and RBS and stuff like that. But just give us an idea of what was it like leading that sort of a customer experience vision for those businesses?
Back then when we were looking at our competitors, we weren't looking at Halifax and Lloyd's and HSBC. We were looking at Amazon, Virgin, Apple, online brands as being our competitors in that kind of space. I think it was about moving the customer to a more central part of the conversation. The customer was talked about, but it was almost on the sidelines. And whilst we talked about holding the customer at the heart of what we do, it wasn't always central to all the decision making. And in a very kind of commercial, I say operational organization, bringing customer feelings, emotions, it's a bit of a mismatch at times. But yeah, that's the journey it was on. And I had a really supportive CEO, a really good peer group that I worked with. And over a period of time, we transformed the culture, bringing the customer more to the heart of the conversation. It's how we met through the Salesforce project that I initiated there, which was a big part of bringing customers to to the core of our thinking and bringing data and insight to the decision making.
Okay, so I'm gonna go just break into some like specific stuff that I remember about working with you over the years. So I always wanted to ask you this question. So in one of our first meetings, you wore Superman cufflinks. And I remember sitting there, and I'll tell you, I remember the exact date. So it was the 18th of March, day after St. Patrick's Day, 2019. I was getting married on the 4th of May, and I had a ton of stuff to do in April. And I got back from Australia on the 16th of March, and I was absolutely out on my feet. And myself and Phil walked into a meeting, and I remember you were giving a presentation. And I looked over, and I was like, is he wearing Superman cufflinks? And I remember just nudging Phil, and I was like, who is this lad? So, what was the deal with the Superman cufflinks?
Oh gosh, goes back to kind of childhood. So, as I said, I was an immigrant. Well, my father was an immigrant. I was born here, but my father was an immigrant. And the Superman mythology resonates with me so much because it's about trying to be two different people, Superman or Clark Kent, and you're split between the two. Like, who are you? And my early years, I had a life behind doors where I was an Indian kid with an Indian family. We ate Indian food every day. We had a community and all of that kind of stuff. And then I went to a predominantly white school where I was this other kid. And throughout my life, you talked earlier on about in your early 20s and when you're going through your career, there's this constant battle between who you are and who you show up in the world. And I think when I got to my 40s, it just became, well, it's which one is it, Clark Kent or Superman? It's Superman, because that's who you really are to the world. That's your kind of how you show up in the place, and that's why it's always resonated with me, that dual identity thing. The whole superhero thing is there's another podcast for that, Shane, another time. But yeah, that's always been a key thing in my life ever since I was a kid. Superman's been really important.
As I said at the very start, you have a fantastic optimism, enthusiasm, that sort of verb for life. I follow a lot of your stuff on LinkedIn, and you're always sort of like trying to push the envelope and trying to make that even life experience for people better, not even customer experience. So like that sort of brings us on to the next piece. Like, obviously you've worked in the sort of customer experience, customer success side of the business for a lifetime. As a consultant, and then obviously in National Express, and you worked at brands like Audi and RBS and stuff like that. But like, just give us an idea of like, what was it like leading that sort of a customer experience vision for those businesses?
Very different, but in all of those, I guess the common theme was the belief that I had in the difference that experience makes in life. And when you strip it all back, it comes down to relationships, Shane. Whether you are a customer, whether it's family, whether it's partners, whatever it is, fundamentally it comes down to relationships. And the key element of that is trust. So this is all about building trust in those interactions and relationships. And so that was always the driving force. So my grandfather had a business in Kenya. That's how my family ended up there. And although he died when I was very young, I was 5 when he died. I was his first of his grandchildren from the boys in his family. And the people tell me about how close he was to me, to carry me everywhere and take me everywhere and all those kind of things. The way I've got to know him is in the stories that people tell about him and how they talk about his character and who he was as a human being. And my relationship, my grandfather developed against that. And one of the things that I learned about him was he didn't speak great English. So in his business, whenever he referred to you in the shoe shop that he referred to you whether you were a man or whether you were a woman. He referred to you as madam, but it wasn't what he said, but it's how he said it and the relationships he built with his customers that was the success, right? And so I think that just filtered down through my dad in his business that he ran, and then to my DNA. You talk very kindly about my infectious, quest for life and the way I make people feel. And I think that it came from, it was obviously instilled in me at some level from my values and the way I was brought up. But I think where it really came into focus was I read a book a few years ago called The Art of Possibility by Benjamin Zander. And in there he shares a story of a brother and sister who were during the war, were on a train going to Auschwitz. And the older sister and the younger brother are there. And the older sister's chastising this younger brother because he's not tied his shoes up properly, and he's not done it. His clothes are, all over the place. He's like, oh, come on, tidy yourself up. What are people going to think? And when they got to Auschwitz, sadly, he didn't make it out, and she did. And she always regretted that being the last conversation that she had with him.
Yeah.
And so what that taught me was this important thing about when you speak to people and when they're in your presence, like, you don't want that to be the last thing that they remember about you. So I have this thing that I try to do where I always want people leaving my presence feeling better than when they first came into it. And I think that's just stuck as a kind of guiding light and a set of principles that I've had in my lifetime.
Yeah, no, and like it's a hugely admirable trait. It's like making sure that we sort of hold on to those stories. Yeah, I think it's really important that we don't forget where we come from.
People will forget all the things that you did and whatever, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. Like you always remember warmly those people, whether it's brands, like, for example, whenever I start in a conference or in a workshop and I say to people, tell me your best customer experience, normally it starts with something that went wrong, but it's how the company fixed it, and it involves an individual or people that they remember that helped them through that period, right? And in your life, the same thing happens. You remember the people in your toughest moments that have been there standing alongside you and helped you and inspired you and all of those kind of things, and teachers from school that have believed in you when nobody else did, and all of those kind of things, right? They're the things that stick with us, and that's what we reflect on in life, and that circle thing. And so I definitely back to where we began. It all comes down to relationships. It's about every moment that matters. It's about those interactions that we have and the memories that we create. That's what shapes our life going forward.
We've talked about like your different leadership around customer experience and stuff like that, and you've mentioned at the start of the conversation about your public speaking. Like, was this always the plan?
So I think when I was really young, the plan was to be a pilot, an obsession with flying, and then I was just not good enough with maths. It was just never going to happen. And so I went from flying to then I enjoyed, I was always a quite creative kid. So I was in a lot of performing arts. I was in the choir at school. I was in productions of Joseph and Oliver and Cats and all of these kind of things. Not always singing, but I was enjoyed doing that. And then I think from a community perspective, Birmingham's got a big Indian community, and my community was centered around a temple that we opened in the 1980s, and we had lots of shows and lots of kind of events there. So I was always involved in that kind of stuff as well. So I think from an early age, being in front of people, creating relationships, working with strangers was just kind of almost second nature to me, and probably a little bit from being in my dad's shop as well and sitting on the till and just saying hello to people every day when I was a little kid. And then the public speaking piece probably has come to like the last decade, maybe 15 years of life. I like standing up and giving presentations has never been an issue, but I think I really started to hone my craft and take it really seriously probably about a decade ago, I think now. I got some training, I really studied it. I love watching great speakers and orators, and I pick up stuff from there. I've coached people and taught people how to present and speak better. I still do. And then when I came out of National Express this time round, when I came out of in July, really focus on that as a key component of what I do. Because what I love is the moments where I'm sharing an idea, a story, a concept in a way that cuts through all of the noise, and you see it land with somebody and you see the light bulb come on in their head, and they suddenly they grab a pen and they suddenly write something down, or there's a conversation that takes place, or somebody comes to me afterward and go, I'd never thought about what you said this way. Like yesterday I was at an apprenticeship conference, and I was speaking to them about the power of relationships and driving loyalty and stuff. And I just shared 5 personal stories from life, nothing to do with business, and then just taking the learnings. And somebody came to me afterwards and said, like, that was such an incredible way of getting the information across, that it really resonated, because the stories I shared were universal. People connected with them, but they took away the idea and the concept in a way that they probably might not have done for. And I'm sure other people would have said similar things to them, but just, maybe in a different way. So yeah, that's kind of the road that led to public speaking, but that's my passion. If you said to me, I could only do one thing for the rest of my life for work, that would be it. I love it. I really enjoy it.
So career. Listen, so obviously we talked about like personal heroes and stuff like that, and obviously you talked about your parents, and your grandfather and your dad and stuff working in the shop and everything like that. Like, is there any business person or entrepreneur that you're just like, I think what they do is amazing. I follow them. I subscribe to what they're about.
I don't think there's a single person. I think there are lots of different people. So I love Tom Peters. I love what he brings to the table. I read In Search of Excellence was one of my early books that I read, and I love what he talks about. Jim Collins, Built to Last. I like Tony Robbins from a personal development perspective was one of my first kind of go-tos. Brian Tracy, Jim Rohn, all of those kind of guys that talked about mindset. Zig Ziglar, Les Brown are all kind of great speakers in that kind of sense. And I think later in my life, I've tried to explore different things. So more recently, probably listening to people like Andrew Huberman, who's the neuroscientist, who talks a lot about kind of mind and well-being and all that kind of like the impact of the brain. I listen to Steve Bartlett. I like the podcast he does, but I equally like the High Performance podcast as well. Read Jack Welch's biography years ago, and I thought what he did was quite remarkable. Where you take the bottom 20% in your organisation and you churn them out. What he did at GE. Obviously, your other ones like Steve Jobs and people like that. So they're the big business ones. Most of my heroes come from non-business backgrounds, like just people that I see. So in a cricketing world, Sachin Tendulkar is like that. I was a teenager when he was a teenager. We're about the same age, so I watched his career. Brian Lara, but also the great West Indies team of the 70s and the 80s. Some of the Australians that came through. More recently, Mahendra Singh Dhoni, who was India's captain up until a few years ago. Just his mindset about control the controllables. You can't control the victory, you can't control the loss, but all you can do is control what's in your mindset. People like that, and other sporting heroes that are in that space, but also family members. Like I have, there's my dad and my granddad, and there's people in my wife's side of the family who are just people that I've grown to know over the years that have just had an impact on me. Uncles, like I think I wrote on LinkedIn about my uncle that I just did a stint in his off license over Christmas once, just for a few weeks, and just watching how he was with customers, remembering their names, remembering what they bought, remembering what their kids did, and the conversation he last had with them. And this is when he was in his 70s, right? And he was still sharp and just remembering, hi Peter, welcome back. How did that thing go with your daughter that you said the other day? And this guy's looking at him, how does this man remember all of this stuff?
It's because he has to. That's why. It's because he has to. And I think that there was a thing I seen yesterday was there's an Irish finance guy, Owen McGee, and he's in the States at the moment, and he was talking about the fact that they're starting to do what's that thing called, dynamic pricing in supermarkets. This is terrifying, right? So dynamic pricing in supermarkets, that if you walk in and the camera sees you, recognize your face, and you buy beer every week, and you go up to the beer aisle and you buy your beer will be a different price to my beer will be, and it'll be a different price to someone else's beer because you buy it every week. So you're going to get dynamically priced. And that is terrifying. I would much rather deal with your uncle and buy my beer off him, and it's going to be the same price every week, and he actually knows who I am and has a genuine interest. So that's one of the scary parts of AI and dynamic pricing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was just looking at like in some of your like different articles, different conversations stuff. You talk about turning like glitches into riches. So that's like one of your taglines. So do you want to give us a bit of a lowdown on that?
Life things happen to us. They're just things that happen to us, but we have a choice about how we use those things and how we respond to those. So I talked about my things that happened in my family. I talked about my mum died on my wedding day. My wife and I lost twin babies. We lost another baby the year after. Have redundancies, failed businesses, all these little things that happen, and they're glitches in your lifetime. But you can turn them into riches by how you relate to the experience and your learning and your growth through those things, and that's simply what it's about. There are a set of principles that I have around that, and I won't share all of them right now, but things like learning to forgive and let go. Like so many of us carry stuff around in our life like excess baggage. And you can only carry around so much, but you've got to learn to let go of some stuff. So things like that, things like being able to take responsibility for stuff that happens in your life. And I think sometimes we're so good at pointing the finger at everybody else and it's somebody else's fault. And that might be true, but ultimately you can choose your response. You know, and sometimes you need a minute, and sometimes the way you respond initially isn't always the best way to respond, but you ultimately control your emotions and how you feel about things. It's like when people say, oh, I got an angry email the other day, I got an angry text. I'm like, well, how can it be? Because it's just text on a screen. It doesn't convey any emotion. The way that you've read it has given you, you've implied the emotion. And how often do we react to something, then we speak to the person that sent it and they go, oh, I didn't mean it that way. And you're like, well, there you go. And I think little things like that you learn. So I just think life is a constant learning experience. Like even now, in this sort of almost a year that I've this new business that I've set up and the speaking thing, you know, there are moments that you kind of look at yourself and go, what on earth am I doing? But you keep headstrong. You learn all those experiences and you keep plugging away.
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right. I think it's all about perception. Yeah, look, it's same as yourself. Lots of personal stuff has happened over the years, and it does shape you. Hard to walk away from a lot of it, you know. You kind of like, how do I get up from this again? But I think you just have to keep moving forward.
Complete. And I think with you know the younger generation, we can say that resiliency, but I think it's the context is different. The resiliency towards what is different. You know, they are clearly, you know, from a mental well-being perspective, there's a whole set of different challenges. Like, thankfully, I grew up in a world before the internet, so I know what it's like pre and post. My daughter has grown up in a connected world. It's always been with her. And so it's a different impact and a different set of resiliencies. And I think our job is to kind of be that wise head and help them to navigate that.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's, moderating the technical world and digital world is, I think we're the great moderators, Vinay. I think that's what we're going to become. Obviously, like we've talked a lot about like what drives you and stuff, but give me an unpopular opinion on like the customer experience sector.
I think fundamentally one of the gift and the curse around customer experience is this. If you took 10 people in a line and you asked them what sales was, 10 people would pretty much give you the same answer. If you asked them what marketing was, the 10 people would probably give you the same answer or a similar answer. If you ask 10 people what customer experience was, you'd probably get at least 8 different answers to what it is. CX is a melting pot of all of the different disciplines. And sometimes I think when I see really great people in CX, really great CX leaders, they're smart, they're bright, they're intelligent, they do really great work. And often their limiting factor is because they've grown up in customer experience and only seen customer service, they see the world through that lens. And so everything they articulate comes through that lens. They're not able to connect with the CFO or the COO or the CMO and speak the same language and have that cross-functional conversation in the most articulate or connecting way because they don't necessarily see things from those different perspectives. So I think more needs to be done, not just with the relationships between us and our customers, but also internally, that networking. Because look, ultimately, the CX leader is like the conductor of an orchestra. They don't play any of the instruments, rarely, but they rely on everybody playing the instrument to the best of their ability at the right time to make the sheet music sound like it should. And that's what I think the missing part, that ability to influence, the ability to build relationships, build understanding, speak from different lenses and connect the dots together. That for me is the real core skill set.
Yeah, and I think though, like, so podcast one we had David Willock on, and David was the ex CTO of the ETAIL Limited and the Quick Fit Group, right? So, but he very much would have fallen in line with what you're talking about here. So he was saying, like, the unfortunate thing is people not getting their hands into the business, and this is kind of back to what he was saying to. I'll ask you at the end, but like, what would you say to your 21-year-old self? And he was saying to see all the facets of the business and interact with all people across the business to actually understand what your role is. From your perception on AI? Like, how far do you feel it will go, and how will it shape like the customer experience aspects of any business? And even if you want to just focus on one in particular.
I think that just like other technology has come into our lives, whether we want it to or not, it's going to start to impact what we're doing. And I think that I think it's the mindset of the organization that will shape how much it does. So in a positive way, I think it will enhance the experience, and it will make things easier for customers, particularly. And as human beings, we're lazy. We like the path of least resistance. So if we can remove friction as much as we can, then great. If we can make check-in easy, so I don't have to wait and queue and stuff, that's great. But do I want a robot coming and cleaning my room? I don't know. Maybe I do, because I don't really see the cleaner. But do I want a robot greeting me at the desk? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I think it depends on context. So I think it's interesting to look down the track and see what might come. But it will. AI is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And like I always say, technology is an enabler. It's a facilitator to make it. But the aim of technology should always be to make the experience better. That should be the fundamental principle behind it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I think we've the last two conversations I've had, the term AI for AI's sake has come up, and I think we're seeing a lot of that at the moment, where there's businesses are panicking and are like, we need to get AI into our stack, we need to have some form of opinion on AI and stuff like that. Yeah, I think there's some fantastic applications. I think the majority of what we're seeing at the moment is going to get scrapped because it'll just become core functionality. But I think what we're going to see long term will be the businesses who sat back and sort of, not that they didn't have an opinion, but they formulated their opinion and formulated their plan and sort of went slow to go fast. I think they're the ones that are going to do better out of AI in the long term. Do you feel that there is too much data now available to create meaningful experiences, and especially in comparison to where we were 10 years ago, when we knew a set amount of information about our customers and we knew what they wanted and we knew their buying history or whatever, but now we know Wi-Fi, we know preferences, we know everything. Is it getting too hard to create a meaningful experience?
I think it is getting more complex and harder. The more data points you have, the more things you're trying to assimilate and validate and connect together. So yeah, we might be data rich, but we're insight poor.
Yeah, it's all about our interpretation again. So like, there's just so much data there for everything, and I think GDPR at least helps us a lot because we're getting the more up-to-date view of the data, so it will moderate the volume of it. But obviously, like, we deal with customers globally, so some places are GDPR, some places there's not, but there is other rules. But yeah, I think being able to at least be more concise with the most recent data, at least we can start to build something. But I would say, dealing with customers across multiple different sectors, and in particular with the travel and transport sector, there's just so many touch points the whole time, and you're trying to really get on top of it.
There is, and you can relate it to the food industry now. We're becoming much more aware of what all the little numbers mean on the label, more aware of the different ingredients, where they're sourced from. So we're starting to want more and more data to do it. And whilst that data is helpful, it can make us help better decisions, it can also paralyze us from making any decisions, right? So I think it's always, the power is in how are you using the data to shape the decisions in your life, in the things that you're trying to do. How are you taking that, the fact that you wanted to collect this data point, how are you actually using that in your business to shape better decisions? Because if you're not, then you're just creating, like you said, AI for AI's sake. You can collect data for data's sake, right? And I think a lot of the time we've also got to be brutally honest with ourselves that a lot of companies are leaping to, yeah, we'll get AI, we'll get data. They're not even doing the fundamental basics right yet. And you've got to get that right first before you layer all this stuff on top, because you're just building on a foundation of sand otherwise, and you're not going to have something that's sustainable. So the consistency in the basics is your fundamental, and then build stuff on top.
Shit data equals shit AI in the long term. So I think effectively, if we're able to get to the stage of building good data foundations, good response to what we actually want to build as a platform and our customer experience piece, and then create proper insights in AI, I think we're on to a winner. It's crazy. Okay, well, look, we're starting to come to the end of things, but I have a few quick fire questions, so if you're interested in it. Okay, so Vinay, luxury break or adventure holiday?
Adventure holiday.
Adventure holiday. Favorite band?
Oh gosh, too many. So Coldplay, because I went to their concert last year and it was unbelievably good.
Cats or dogs?
Cats, I've got a cat. Stormzy is around here somewhere.
Stormzy.
Yeah. Stormzy.
Uh, what's next for Vinay Parmar?
Global domination.
Locked. Hey, listen, Superman. This is you're meant to be looking after this place, not taking it over.
Yeah. I'm really focused on building my speaking business. So for me, the next decade is about traveling, seeing the world. So my plan is speaking business, travel the world, speaking in different destinations, hopefully destinations that link with cricket so I can watch cricket while I'm out there, so I can serve two purposes at the same time. So that's my 10-year plan.
Very good, very good. Okay, so if you could give one piece of advice to your 21-year-old self, what would it be?
Speak less and listen more.
Very good, very good. And finally, define what success looks like for you.
When you can look back on your life and you know that you have positively impacted the people that you love most in the world. And that's it.
Done.
Done.
Done and dusted. Okay, well, listen, Vinay, as always, I love having conversation with you. It's fantastic. And thanks for being a guest on the Noble Data Show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me, mate.
Brilliant. Thanks a million. So, yet again, I've been Shane Burns, CEO of Show Off, and this is the Noble Data Show where we talk to the people behind the tech. Thanks so much for being here. If you've listened the whole way, we very much appreciate it. And if you're interested in talking about your next technical project, we'd love to hear from you at www.showoff.ie. And hopefully, we'll be back soon with more amazing guests. Thanks and see you next time.